He is a narcissist. That is what Brett Butler, one of the Los Angeles Dodgers' greatest leaders and most respected voices in baseball throughout the organization, said about Mike Piazza, a moody, self-centered superstar who created a trail of enemies across Major League Baseball. A man who left a wake of resentment and fractured relationships wherever he played and wherever he traveled with his team. But before you think this is just another hollow, hate-filled rant with no substance or factual basis behind it, let me pause here and tell you something very important and honest about this story.
Mike Piazza stands as arguably the greatest offensive catcher ever to step foot on a baseball field in the entire history of the game. This man was a 62nd round draft pick, the absolute lowest point in the entire draft pool where teams pick players. Nobody wanted him in the draft when he was selected. Nobody believed in him whatsoever from day one. Yet he defied every astronomical odd stacked against him in the sport. He became a Hall of Famer. His numbers are absolutely staggering and remarkable beyond belief. His consistency over nearly 2 decades is legendary. His talent with a bat is undeniable and speaks for itself. His place in baseball history as a hitter is completely secure and permanent forever. No one disputes his greatness at the plate. His achievements are documented for all to see in the record books. However, there is another side to Mike Piazza's story that is equally important and needs to be told with honesty and integrity. Beneath those incredible and gaudy hitting statistics lies a career marked by interpersonal friction, broken relationships, leadership voids, and deep-seated resentment from peers, rivals, and mentors who shared the game with him for extended periods. This is the real story of how one of baseball's greatest talents became one of baseball's most polarizing and divisive figures in the clubhouse. This is the story of the man who conquered the field but could never quite conquer the clubhouse and the hearts of his teammates and the people around him. Now, speaking of which, if you are enjoying this deep dive into baseball drama and the real reasons these legends clashed with each other throughout their careers, hit that hype button right now. Your support and feedback means absolutely everything as we uncover the real reasons so many legendary baseball figures clashed with Mike Piazza throughout his career. This is important work bringing these stories to light for fans. Let us get started with this incredible story that shaped an entire era of baseball and changed how people think about leadership and character in sports forever. Number 5. Bob Geren and the final decline of a superstar. Piazza's final chapter in Major League Baseball was with the Oakland Athletics, and it was a complete disaster from start to finish in every way imaginable. His time there did absolutely nothing to soften his reputation or change the negative narrative that had followed him his entire career, relentlessly and persistently. Instead, it reinforced every single criticism that had been leveled against him throughout his long professional life in the sport. The friction between Piazza and manager Bob Geren became a public spectacle that highlighted exactly why so many people in baseball had grown tired of dealing with him and his constant drama and mood swings throughout the clubhouse. By this point in his career, Piazza was reaching the end of his time as a professional baseball player. His glory days with the Mets and Dodgers were far behind him. He was no longer the young superstar who could carry a team on his shoulders. He was approaching the twilight of his career, where diminished abilities became apparent. Yet the old patterns that had defined his entire professional life continued to emerge, despite everything. He could not seem to learn from his past mistakes. He could not seem to grow as a person. It all started with an anonymous quote that appeared in the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper. Someone from the Oakland clubhouse had given a critical quote about Geren's managerial moves and decision-making as a leader of the team. Bob Geren had a pretty solid idea about who that somebody was, based on the content and tone of the quote. Based on what he knew about the team dynamics and personality conflicts within the clubhouse, he believed the quote came straight from Piazza himself. So what did Geren do in response to this insubordination and betrayal of trust? He called a full team meeting. In front of the entire roster, in front of all his players standing together in the clubhouse, he called out Piazza's lack of professionalism and his complete inability to communicate like a real veteran leader should communicate with his manager and teammates. This public rebuke was meant to establish who was in charge. This public rebuke was meant to show Piazza that he was not in control anymore. For most of his career in New York and Los Angeles, Piazza had received special treatment as the franchise superstar. He was the guy everyone had to accommodate and work around constantly. He was the centerpiece of the offense and the face of the franchise. He was the guy whose moods and preferences set the tone in the clubhouse. Guerin was not going to play that game any longer. He was not going to let one aging superstar dominate the clubhouse dynamics and control everyone around him as he pleased. He was going to manage his team his way, according to his principles and standards. This was his clubhouse now, not Piazza's. Piazza's response, naturally, was defensive and blame-shifting in the extreme. In his autobiography, Long Shot, Piazza admitted the quote sure sounded like something he would say and put his name on immediately. But instead of owning his words like a mature professional would do, he attacked the journalist Susan Slusser. He speculated publicly that she had somehow revealed him as the source, a claim that Slusser completely and vehemently denied on the record. This incident perfectly captured a recurring theme throughout Piazza's entire career: his inability to take personal responsibility for his own actions, and his tendency to blame external forces for his problems. When confronted with accountability, he did not face the music and accept consequences. He lashed out at someone else. He deflected blame away from himself. This was the pattern that defined his final years as a player and his entire career trajectory in baseball. Throughout his life, Piazza would face accountability. Throughout his life, Piazza would blame others for his problems. He never changed. Number 4, Guillermo Mota and the theatrical tough guy act. Not every conflict in Piazza's career involved superstars or legendary figures in the game of baseball. Sometimes, the most revealing incidents involved simple on-field altercations that exposed exactly how his peers really viewed him as a person and as a leader in the clubhouse. Guillermo Mota, a relatively unknown and obscure Dodgers pitcher, provided a perfect window into how even journeyman players saw through Piazza's tough guy act and questioned his authenticity. What happened between Piazza and Mota revealed something truly crucial and essential about his reputation in the clubhouse and how teammates perceived him as a person and competitor. The conflict actually started earlier, with a 2002 beaning incident that had created bad blood between the two men and their families. But the situation really escalated dramatically during a 2003 spring training game in Florida, where tensions boiled over completely. Mota threw at Piazza again, this time hitting him directly in the shoulder with force. Piazza erupted in anger immediately, and without hesitation or thought. He did what many players do when hit by a pitcher throwing at them intentionally. He charged the mound with clear intent and fury in his eyes toward Mota. Mota panicked completely at Piazza's aggression and violent charge toward him. Instead of standing his ground or fighting back like a man defending himself, he threw his glove at the catcher and then ran toward the dugout like he was genuinely scared for his physical safety. That is when Art Howe, the Mets manager at the time, made a comment that would follow Piazza around for years to come. He said Mota ran like a scared rabbit, implying he was a coward who would not stand up for himself. The optics were absolutely terrible for Mota's reputation, but that was not actually the end of the story. It was just the beginning of something much bigger and more revealing. After the game ended, Piazza was still incredibly furious and seething with anger over the entire incident. The incident had not resolved anything for him emotionally or psychologically. So what did he do in his emotional state of rage? He entered the Dodgers clubhouse, searching for Mota to continue the confrontation and finish what he started. He went into the opposing team's locker room, looking for revenge or a confrontation with Mota. This was a major and serious breach of baseball etiquette and basic clubhouse security protocols that everyone knows about. You simply do not walk into the opposing team's private locker room looking for a physical confrontation with another player. It is one of the unwritten rules of the game that is absolutely sacred. When he was told that Mota had already left the stadium and was no longer there anywhere on the premises, Piazza's dramatic search for his rival was not seen as brave or legitimately tough by anyone who witnessed it firsthand. Instead, Mota and his teammates viewed it as pure theatrical nonsense, a performance of toughness, rather than genuine courage or real leadership in the moment. It was seen as over-the-top and staged for dramatic effect to impress people. The whole display seemed calculated to make himself look tough, when in reality, it was the opposite. The mockery that followed from the Dodgers dugout was incredibly telling and revealing about how players really viewed Piazza as a person and competitor. These were guys who played against Piazza on a regular basis throughout their careers. These were guys who knew him as a competitor and as a person day in and day out. And they laughed at him openly. They did not fear him as a person or as a competitor they had to worry about. They did not respect the dramatic display of searching through their clubhouse. They saw it as theatrical nonsense, over the top, and completely inconsistent with the behavior of a truly respected veteran leader in the locker room. The mockery stung more than any fine. It revealed the truth about how people perceived him. The disciplinary fallout that followed reflected the severity of the incident and how baseball authorities viewed it from every angle. Piazza received a $3,000 fine and a 5-game suspension for his actions entering the opposing clubhouse, which was unusual and serious. Mota got $1,250 and 5 games for hitting Piazza in the first place. Jeremy Burnitz, who joined in the pursuit of Mota, received a $500 fine for his involvement. But the real punishment for Piazza was not the monetary fine or the games missed from playing. It was the mockery and disrespect from his peers in the clubhouse, who mocked him relentlessly and openly. The punishment was the knowledge that he had embarrassed himself completely. It reinforced the narrative that had followed him his entire career. He was moody, his emotions were frequently out of control, and he was fundamentally not the kind of leader that wins ball games and championships. Real leaders do not lose control of their emotions like that. Real leaders do not chase rivals through opposing clubhouses. Number 3, Reggie Jefferson and the steroid cloud that never dissipated. This is where things get tricky and complicated, because it involves accusations and whispers rather than direct confrontations between two competing individuals. But the steroid shadow that followed Mike Piazza throughout his career created resentment and suspicion that fundamentally shaped how people perceived him as a person. Despite never failing a drug test or being named in any government investigation, Piazza became a primary target of the era's whisper campaign. And Reggie Jefferson, a respected player who had earned the respect of his peers, spoke what many other players were thinking but refused to say publicly. Jefferson was a longtime first baseman who had played in the majors for years and truly knew the game inside and out thoroughly. He voiced the frustrations of many peers and competitors who felt that Piazza was unfairly shielded from the same scrutiny and skepticism that hit other superstars during the steroid era. Jefferson made a bold and direct public statement that shocked people everywhere. He said Piazza was a guy who did it, and everybody in baseball knows it completely. This was a direct accusation without concrete proof or evidence of wrongdoing, but it represented a significant break in the traditional code of silence among players in professional baseball. Teammates and rivals usually do not call each other out like this in public forums, but Jefferson was frustrated enough to do it. He felt Piazza was being protected by the establishment, while others faced the scrutiny they deserved for their performances. Jefferson believed Piazza should answer questions just like anyone else. He believed Piazza should explain his transformation. But Piazza seemed to get a pass that other players never received. The circumstantial evidence was always there floating around for people who wanted to believe it and investigate further on their own. Piazza arrived in the majors in 1992, right at the exact moment when the steroid era was entering its most aggressive and competitive phase. He maintained a historic and unprecedented level of production that some deemed statistically suspicious for a catcher position in baseball. He experienced what could be described as a meteoric rise through the minor league system and showed specific physical markers that critics pointed to repeatedly: persistent back acne that was unusual for an adult, and rapid muscle mass gain after entering the league. None of this proved anything conclusively about drug use or PED use. But in the steroid era, suspicion was often treated as enough evidence for fans and media outlets covering the sport. The steroids in baseball were everywhere. They were accepted. They were normalized. Many players used them. Many teams knew about it. The culture allowed it to happen. Eric Gagne, a former Dodgers teammate of Piazza, further fueled these suspicions with his book called Game Over that came out after retirement from baseball. Gagne did not name Piazza directly as a performance-enhancing drug user, but he made a shocking claim that 80% of his Dodgers teammates were using performance-enhancing drugs. This created what you might call guilt by association for every star who played in that organization. If 80% of your teammates in that organization were using, what does that logically say about you and your performances on the field? Think about the implications of that statement. That means if you were a star in that clubhouse during that era, people would assume you were using too. Gagne's own admission of HGH use and the documented paper trail linking him to clubhouse attendants who distributed drugs suggested a culture where PED use was normalized and accepted within the Dodgers organization during Piazza's extended time there. It was not just a few people using. It was systemic. It was part of the culture. The organization knew, or should have known, what was happening in the clubhouse. Piazza's response in his autobiography, Long Shot, was defensive and ultimately unconvincing to many baseball writers who had covered the game for decades and understood the sport deeply. He attributed his incredible power and hitting ability to teenage weightlifting fixations and to muscle magazines he had read in his youth. He said he ate a steady and disciplined diet of oatmeal and nothing else special or unusual for performance. He dismissed the persistent back acne as a result of a teenage job caddying in the sun during his formative years. He also mentioned that his physical transformation could have been due to dedicated training in his teen years. These explanations might have worked in 1995 when he was in his prime and peak earning years, but by the time Piazza was trying to get into the Hall of Fame and win over voters in 2016, many writers were deeply skeptical of his denials and defensive posture. His explanations felt hollow to people who had watched his career unfold. The cloud stuck with him permanently and would not dissipate. Even without a failed drug test or positive evidence, the suspicion fueled the resentment and negativity that many in baseball felt toward him and his legacy forever. Number 2, Roger Clemens and the bat shard incident that defined an era. The rivalry between Mike Piazza and Roger Clemens is absolutely and universally cited as the defining conflict of the 2000s baseball era, and perhaps of the entire modern game. This was not just simple competition between two great athletes trying to outperform each other at the highest level. This was physical endangerment. This was psychological warfare at the highest level of competition. This was one of the most controversial and infamous incidents in World Series history. While the 2000 World Series bat shard moment is the most visually iconic and memorable moment of this entire feud, the animosity was actually rooted in something much deeper and more personal between the men. It all started with a regular season interleague game on July 8th, 2000. Piazza had established himself as one of the very few hitters who could consistently damage and hurt Roger Clemens on the mound. He had launched 3 home runs off the legendary right-hander in previous matchups between the two competitors. Clemens was a pitcher whose entire career was built on aggressive pitching, using the inner half of the plate as a weapon to intimidate and discourage hitters from being comfortable in the batter's box. This was his philosophy. This was how he pitched. He believed in owning the inner part of the plate. He believed that hitters needed to know they were not safe or comfortable standing in the box against him. On this particular day in July, Clemens delivered a fastball that struck Piazza squarely in the head with force. The impact was severe and devastating to Piazza's health and his confidence. Piazza suffered a significant concussion that was serious and required medical attention and evaluation. He had to miss that year's All-Star game completely, which was a huge blow to his pride. The rift between the two men would never heal and only grew deeper with each passing year and confrontation between them on the field. The historical record shows a sharp and clear divergence in how people viewed and interpreted this incident. Clemens and his supporters, including Yankees manager Joe Torre and pitching coach Mel Stottlemyre, maintained that it was a tactical error and nothing more sinister or intentional. They said the fastball simply got away from him while he was trying to jam a dangerous hitter inside on the plate. But Piazza saw this incident completely differently than Clemens and his camp believed. He remained unequivocal in his honest assessment and belief. Clemens, a pitcher with elite command and control, hit him on purpose, intentionally, and deliberately. This was an intentional act designed to neutralize a threat to his pitching and dominance on the mound. The two men never agreed on what happened or why it happened on that day. Their dispute over this incident became emblematic of their entire rivalry and would haunt them both for decades to come. Neither man would ever back down from their position. The tension between them reached its absolute peak during Game 2 of the 2000 World Series at Yankee Stadium in New York. In the first inning, Piazza's bat shattered on a Clemens fastball. The barrel fragment broke away violently and helicoptered toward the mound in a dangerous way. And then, Clemens did something extraordinary and shocking to everyone watching the game. He retrieved the jagged shard of broken bat and hurled it violently toward the first base line. The sharp piece of wood narrowly missed Piazza as he ran out the foul ball to first base. This moment became one of the most inexplicable and shocking acts in World Series history ever witnessed by fans. Clemens claimed he thought the bat fragment was the baseball and was just tossing it out of the way to prevent a trip hazard on the field. This excuse was met with widespread skepticism, even among Yankees supporters and loyal fans of the team. Professional analysis suggests that a pitcher of Clemens' elite caliber would never mistake a large, jagged piece of wood for a 5-ounce baseball used in the game. A pitcher would not logically throw a baseball at a hitter running toward first base instead of making a play for the out. Something else was happening in that moment on the field. The intensity of the moment, the way Clemens hurled the shard, the trajectory of the throw, suggested pure anger and rage. It suggested a desire to hurt or intimidate. It looked intentional to everyone watching. The commissioner's office issued a $50,000 fine for inappropriate conduct and reckless behavior. No ejection occurred during the game, a decision that remains a point of intense historical debate among fans and players alike. Piazza opted for restraint over a brawl, later describing the situation as a lose-lose scenario where he could not win no matter what. Some observers interpreted Clemens' actions as a manifestation of fearful rage, or even a steroid-fueled loss of emotional control. The fine seemed light for what had happened. $50,000 was a lot of money, but not for someone like Clemens earning millions annually. He could afford to pay it. The fine seemed more like a slap on the wrist than real punishment. Many felt Clemens should have been ejected from the game immediately. Many felt he should have faced a suspension for his behavior. But the commissioner's office chose leniency over strict punishment. For Piazza, the incident reinforced his belief that Clemens was a headhunter who operated outside the bounds of traditional sportsmanship and fair play in baseball. The bat shard itself became truly iconic in baseball history and memorabilia collecting circles everywhere. It sold at auction in 2014 for $47,800, nearly the exact amount of Clemens' original fine from the commissioner. The whole incident came to symbolize how intense and dangerous this rivalry had become between two superstars at the peak of their powers and fame. Two superstars locked in a battle that transcended the normal boundaries of competition in sports. Clemens became the physical threat that Piazza believed was out to hurt him and end his career prematurely and cut short his playing years. Piazza became the hitter that Clemens felt compelled to punish and intimidate into submission. Their feud defined an era of baseball and created one of baseball's most unforgettable and controversial moments ever televised on national television. The image of Clemens throwing the bat shard became one of baseball's most iconic and discussed moments in World Series history. It was replayed endlessly on highlights shows. It was discussed in bars and coffee shops. It was the moment that defined their entire rivalry. The rivalry became bigger than both men. It became part of baseball lore forever. Number 1. Brett Butler, Jeff Kent, Vin Scully, and the complete collapse of the Dodgers clubhouse. This is where the real damage was done to Piazza's reputation and legacy as a player. Not in battles with external rivals like Clemens, but in the complete breakdown of relationships with teammates in the clubhouse and the organization itself. The animosity Piazza faced within the Los Angeles Dodgers organization was perhaps more damaging to his reputation than any external conflict he had with rival pitchers. The critiques from veterans like Brett Butler and Jeff Kent suggest that Piazza's elite offensive production was frequently offset by a perceived lack of leadership and a moody temperament that alienated teammates consistently throughout his tenure. Brett Butler was a quintessential old-school player known for his hustle, his work ethic, and his traditional values. He became the primary architect of the anti-Piazza sentiment in Los Angeles and in the broader baseball community everywhere. Butler famously and publicly characterized Piazza as a moody, self-centered 1990s player. He argued that while Piazza was a generational talent at the plate with incredible hitting ability, he was fundamentally incapable of serving as the foundation of a winning team because he was not a leader. This critique was not merely a simple personality clash between two different people. It was a reaction to the changing culture of Major League Baseball itself and the sport's evolution throughout the decade. Butler represented an older generation of players. He believed in teamwork. He believed in sacrifice. He believed in putting the team first. Piazza seemed to do the opposite to Butler. To Butler, Piazza was all about himself. To Butler, Piazza wanted special treatment. These two approaches to the game were fundamentally incompatible. The 1990s saw the rise of the high-salary superstar era that transformed the game fundamentally and forever. Piazza, despite his incredible underdog origin story as a 62nd round draft pick from nowhere, became the face of this new, individualistic era of baseball. Butler's comments suggested a deep-seated resentment among veteran players who felt that the Dodger way of collective accountability and team-first mentality was being replaced by preferential treatment of a single, often aloof, superstar. To Butler and others of his generation, Piazza represented everything wrong with modern baseball and its changing values. He was selfish in their view. He was moody. He was not a traditional leader by any measure or standard. The conflict between the old guard and the new era of baseball was playing out through Piazza and Butler. It was not just about one player. It was about the future direction of the sport. Then there was Jeff Kent, a second baseman with his own complicated personality and reputation in baseball circles. The friction between Piazza and Kent represented a collision of two famously difficult personalities that could not coexist peacefully. Kent was a blue-collar infielder with a notorious lone wolf attitude and independent streak. He reportedly loathed what he perceived as the superstar treatment afforded to Piazza constantly. The resentment ran incredibly deep and was multifaceted in nature and complexity. Kent resented Piazza's lack of defensive focus behind the plate and his catching abilities. He resented his close relationship with manager Tommy Lasorda, who was often viewed as a surrogate father and mentor to Piazza. To Kent, it seemed like Piazza got special treatment and accommodations that other players did not receive or deserve. Kent felt like he worked hard every day, but never received the same deference or respect from leadership. The dynamic created tension that festered day after day in the clubhouse environment. The relationship between Piazza and Kent became so toxic and dysfunctional that it was explicitly cited as a primary driver for the Dodgers' decision to trade Piazza in 1998. This was not some minor offseason move or roster adjustment by the front office. The trade to the Marlins, and subsequently to the Mets, was a truly seismic event that signaled a total breakdown in the team's internal chemistry. For players like Kent, the departure of Piazza was a necessary and long overdue step in reclaiming the clubhouse from a dynamic that had become completely unsustainable and toxic beyond repair. The trade was not made for baseball reasons. The trade was made to save the clubhouse. The organization felt it had to choose between keeping Piazza or keeping the rest of the team together. In the end, they chose the team. But to understand the trade itself and why it happened, you have to understand what was happening in the Dodgers organization at that exact time. The O'Malley family, longtime owners of the Dodgers, was in the process of selling the team to Fox, a corporate giant looking to expand its regional sports presence in America. This transition created a massive leadership vacuum that exacerbated the tensions surrounding Piazza's looming free agency and his contract demands. The organization was in chaos during this transition period. Nobody knew who was in charge or making decisions. Nobody knew what the future would hold. In this environment of uncertainty and confusion, Piazza's demands seemed even more unreasonable and selfish to ownership and to fans. The timing of his contract demand could not have been worse for his cause. In 1998, Piazza was seeking a contract that would make him the first $100 million player in baseball history. The negotiations were characterized by strategic leaks from both the team and Piazza's agent, Dan Lozano. The leaks were designed to put pressure on both sides. They were designed to control the narrative in the media. They were designed to gain leverage in negotiations. The problem was that the leaks alienated fans in the process. Fans began to resent what they perceived as Piazza's greed. The Dodgers organization leaked that Piazza had turned down a 6-year, $76 million offer, which would have already made him the highest-paid player in the game by a significant margin. This financial tug-of-war occurred during a period of massive economic transition in the sport. Many fans were dealing with the transition from the O'Malley Dodgers to the corporate Fox Dodgers. They began to view Piazza's demands as a sign of greed and a lack of loyalty to the team and the fans who supported him throughout his years in Los Angeles. The greed narrative took hold in the media and among fans everywhere. Piazza was portrayed as ungrateful and selfish for wanting more money and more years. The tension resulted in Piazza being booed by the very fans who had once worshipped him and cheered him on in games. The booing was visceral. It was personal. The fans he loved turned on him. Piazza, in his hypersensitivity to slights and perceived disrespect, blamed all of this on the external forces of the media, rather than examining his own role in the situation and the perception he created. And then there was the Vin Scully situation, perhaps the most revealing incident of all in his entire career that showed his perspective clearly. Perhaps the most controversial claim in Mike Piazza's 2013 autobiography, Long Shot, was his attack on the legendary Dodgers broadcaster Vin Scully. Piazza accused Scully of crushing him and turning the city of Los Angeles against him during the 1998 contract negotiations. Piazza's grievance centered on a 1998 spring training interview conducted for KTLA. In that interview, Scully asked tough questions about the mid-February deadline Piazza had set for a contract agreement with the Dodgers. Piazza perceived Scully's focus on the ultimatum as an extension of the team's front office propaganda, rather than neutral journalism reporting on the facts. The consensus among Dodgers fans and neutral observers was overwhelming and virtually unanimous in agreement. Piazza was imagining things and seeing slights that were not there. He was suffering from a profound misinterpretation of Scully's professional duties as a broadcaster. Scully, who had been with the franchise since its Brooklyn days decades earlier, was renowned for his neutrality and his refusal to criticize players' business decisions and contract disputes. Scully himself stated he does not get involved in contract issues and was flabbergasted by the accusation. When Piazza attempted to scapegoat the sacred voice of Los Angeles, Many viewed it as the ultimate proof of his inability to take personal responsibility for his own public image and his actions. Scully had been doing his job professionally and fairly. He was asking legitimate questions that any broadcaster would ask. But Piazza saw it as a personal attack. Piazza saw it as Scully siding with management against him. This showed how warped Piazza's perspective had become over the years. What emerges from all of this accumulated evidence and these various conflicts is a clear and unmistakable pattern that cannot be ignored. Mike Piazza's various conflicts throughout his entire career were connected by a single, unifying thread that ran through everything. A deep belief that he was being unfairly targeted or undervalued by the baseball establishment and the media. The psychological chip on his shoulder, the same drive that propelled him from a 62nd round draft pick to a Hall of Famer, mutated into a form of hypersensitivity that made him a difficult teammate and a polarizing peer in every clubhouse he entered. His career was marked by as many bridges burned as home runs hit. People who worked with him remember the anger and the sullenness in his demeanor. They remember how quickly he could turn on someone if he felt disrespected. They remember his moody personality that affected everyone around him daily. Some tried to reach out to him and help him see things differently. Some tried to help him grow as a person. But Piazza seemed intent on maintaining his version of reality, no matter how much evidence suggested he was wrong about people's intentions toward him. His defensive stance became a prison of his own making. Yet here is the thing that cannot ever be forgotten or dismissed. His plaques and statistics are completely secure forever. His Hall of Fame plaque is permanent and will never change. His place in baseball history is guaranteed and unassailable. Despite all the drama, all the feuds, all the resentment from peers and rivals, Mike Piazza remains an undeniable force in the history of the game. He conquered the field in ways that few catchers ever have. His hitting prowess is unquestioned by anyone who truly knows the game well. His legacy as an offensive player is cemented forever in the record books for all time. The real tragedy of Mike Piazza's story is not that he failed as a player. It is that a man with such extraordinary talent never seemed to find peace or contentment within the baseball world that made him famous and wealthy beyond measure. He achieved everything a player could achieve at the plate individually, yet his reputation will forever be divided between admiration for his incredible numbers and frustration with his personality and how he treated people around him. That is the complicated legacy of Mike Piazza, a great hitter who will be remembered for so much more than just his statistics and accomplishments on the field. He reminds us that greatness alone is not enough to be truly respected and loved.